You ready? Where's Danny? Capturing the audience. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm
Right. Right, welcome everybody again. Good to see you. There's lots of familiar faces. Anyone new? Come to the last session of the year? Oh, welcome. That's good. We'll probably start again in February. We usually find no one's around in January, so we'll take a break through December and January and then start again up in February. So today we've got a couple of presentations from Daniel, who's presenting on Azure DevOps.
Yeah, he's going to do the talk.
Oh, Aben's going to do most of the talking. You're just going to do the
Because Daniel's
demo.
lost his voice, not because I won't.
So these two guys are going to be running most of the day. I'm going to do a bit of a wrap up on some Office 365 stuff, some numbers and things, and that's pretty much it. Anyone have any questions along the way, please jump in and ask. This is the place to do it, the opportunity to do so. Some logistics stuff. As usual, if you need to use the bathrooms, there's a key hanging on the door. You need to grab that, otherwise you're going to be stuck in the bathroom and have to go all the way downstairs and out. And that's about it. Yep.
Cool.
Do you want to get started then?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'll hand over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Alan. So thanks for turning up, guys. So Dan and I, a couple of weeks ago, we decided we'll do a bit of a series on Azure DevOps. So it's going to be over the next year, like when we start back in February and stuff like that, we'll come and cover more and more stuff. So we're looking at doing a bit of introduction to DevOps and Azure DevOps, for that matter. So we'll cover some of the why aspect of things, and then we'll jump into, if you haven't had any experience with coding infrastructure, Dan will jump into some of those demos. They'll show you how to start and how to get on with it and things like that. We'll do a bit more deep dive into Azure DevOps as well. And the second part of it is pure, from the second series onwards, we are heavily into the whole Azure DevOps landscape. So we'll look at building some sort of a project, and towards the last one, we'll look at scaling it and automating it more and more, because that's where the key for DevOps and Azure DevOps is, right? Cool. So how many of us have been in this position in life? And were you guys the bearded fellow or the other one with the cool jacket on? I've been the bearded guy because I'm from an ops background.
You are the bearded guy.
I'm still the bearded guy. So what does this comic tell us? What do you guys feel? What's your guys' take on it? What's happening here? Anybody?
Bearded guys are there to slow you down.
Okay. That's true. Never been there, never done that. Yeah. What else, guys? What do you see happening here in this sort of scenario?
Silo, bottleneck.
Okay.
Thinking of the secure option.
Okay.
IT's not listening to the business.
Brilliant. That's a good one. Anything else? Everyone anybody from the back? Any feelings on what's happening here? No? Okay, cool. So this is how.
One more.
Okay.
Why didn't the business user ask earlier? Huh? I need it now.
They never do.
Oh,
What's the project plan?
What is it?
yeah.
Okay, so what's been described in this comic strip is a typical scenario that usually the ops team and some sort of team that builds the application, so your typical developers have to go through, right? So looking at my past, developers used to come with a file or a zip file saying, can you deploy this onto the server? And then I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll try deploy it and test. It works in test always, right? And always deploys well. all the tests come out green and things like that. And then you get to the part of actually deploying to production. Middle of the night, you light up the candle, switch on your laptop because it'll be somewhere in the middle of the night that you've got an outage window. And you want to do all this stuff, right? But then things go wrong because production is quite far behind from test, or test is always test is working for some reason because nobody's butchered with test platform. So based on that experience, when somebody comes to me the next time with that piece of code and tells me to deploy stuff, I'm like, oh shit, last time I spent another 3 days trying to fix this thing. Okay, I'm going to be even more careful this time. I'm going to take more effort in copying production into test and then building it and all this stuff. So that's where it goes into, okay, come back in 24 hours. 24 hours is actually quite soon, I guess. Usually my line was 48 hours to 1 week to come back and get another platform to deploy and things like that. So what is that? That's frustration, right? We're seeing fatigue of, oh shit, I have to go and talk to ops guys to get something done. So let's look at the cognitive side of that whole experience, right? We're given a hammer, everything looks like a nail to us. So I've got a hammer, everything is going to be nailed into the wall. That's my muscle memory action sort of thing. And the problem is that we have a past. We have all come from some sort of past that has done certain things a certain way, and we take that into our future as well in terms of our experience, in terms of our pain points and things like that. Oh, based on that experience, I'm going to do this. Based on this, I'm going to do that, no matter what, something new that you could do and things like that. So that's our inbuilt nature to react to certain aspects of it. So how do we deal with technology today, right? So technology needs to be seen as an enabler, not as the actual end goal. So the end goal is not that the developer came up with version 2.1 of that code for that application, and that's not my goal. My goal should be to find a way, a mechanism that we both can coexist. Basically, those two personas can coexist, and whatever is the technology that can enable me to coexist. And keeping the problem simple, right? It should not be something that fatigues us to, oh, there's a code release, there's a release happening next week, and you fear about it from this week onwards as well, right? Be humble and curious. So that's something which I'm really passionate about when I talk to my customers, right? Is about be curious about what's coming in the market and take some time to actually look into what is it offering. Does it actually benefit me and my organization or me and my team and things like that? So be curious about what is coming into the market. So typical scenario, we want to build this. It's in a bunch of app services. We want to host a website. So as of any website, you have an app service, you have databases, you have a caching system and things like that. So we want to build it on Azure. So we go into the Azure portal, we start clicking things, and then we end up with this. Really good naming convention, but I built this. And tomorrow, I go on leave for a month and a half. And Dan wants to know how the cache is built or how something else is built, because he wants to build a test platform or he wants to build production or something of that sort. I'm not there, right? But I have all that knowledge of how I build it, even if it was using the portal or anything of that sort. Dan doesn't have that knowledge. Now, what was back in the days, what we used to do? We used to write this as-built documentation. Yeah, right. How many of us have actually gone back and used that document to rebuild a platform? It's it's 35 pages long, a lot of screenshots, which gives you so much info because you can click into the screenshot, right, and actually get what is in it and stuff like that. So what do? We actually go clicking into Azure portal and try to figure out, use our brains and things like that, try and rebuild this platform, and never succeeds because there are certain things missing. There are certain things in my head why I click something, which is now not passed on. So what are we trying to solve today, right? Now, we want to have some sort of, especially ops guys, we want to bring in some of the common practices that developers have always had, right? So even if it's writing documentation, when you look at something like SharePoint, why is it so good? Because you can save a single document, and every time you press save now, it's a different version of the document. It's a different state of that document. So you can replay and rewind and see how that document was at one point of time. The same way, we should be able to replay a platform and see how it was 4 weeks back or 6 months ago, how it was and why it was done. And then we can forward it forward and stuff like that. CI/CD pipeline, we'll cover that in detail very soon. CI means continuous integration. CD means continuous deployment. We'll cover that in detail. Peer review. I am naturally a person who makes mistakes on a daily basis. All right? And I always love to have my work peer reviewed by somebody else. Just because you get a sounding board, hey, am I doing the right thing? You might do certain things. Some things might come as natural, muscle memory for you. You do it every day. But it's always good to have it checked by somebody else, right? But if you're clicking on stuff in the portal, or if you're just deploying stuff on your own, where do you get to do that peer review, right? Nobody can. You can't just send a screenshot and say, can you do a peer review now, right? You can't. Dependencies. This is one of the biggest pain points that we had back in the days when we didn't have, technologies like this was. Developers build their own dev machines, they put all the dependencies onto it, they send you a document saying these are the dependencies. You can't find half of the stuff in the file server, so you just kind of ignore the DLLs and things will just work. Maybe they just added those dependencies for the heck of it. And things don't work. So you don't have an experimentation. This is the classic thing that I was talking about. I build something. Now I've gone on leave or somebody else wants to play around with that environment. Instead of playing around with an existing environment, they want to take a copy of it, right? And that's the power of cloud and stuff, right? You can make a copy instantly and play with it. You can't experiment it because everything is sitting in my head. So what is infrastructure as a code, right? It's the code that you write should be like a storyline, a storyboard. Chapter 1, this is what gets built. Chapter 2, this is what gets built. And chapter 3. So when you read the code, it should be quite descriptive of what's happening in terms of that. So this is what we expect out of a code. Version control. There should be a mechanism of saving that code somewhere that saves the code in different states. So if I make a change to it tomorrow, I should be able to go back and see what I was overwriting as well, first and foremost, right? Key DevOps practices, which is basically, we're going to touch onto it, so we'll skip that topic for now, but continuous delivery as well. I should be able to redeploy stuff more and more, and it should be continuous. Each time I save something, it should go and give me a certain level of expected outcome for me. So why do we do this, right? Infrastructure drifts is something which I hope all of us have gone through. And what it means is we build something, it's gone live. 3 months down the line, performance is down, guys, can we up the profile on it? Can we do this? Can we make that change? No problem, we did the change. Now that infrastructure that you went live with or you have a documentation for has gone through a change now. And then it goes to other changes, other people add stuff onto it. There's no proper mechanism of actually going and updating your original documentation to say that you've gone through those changes as well. That's what we call an infrastructure drift. So when you rebuild it with your manager screaming at you that you've gone into an outage, you forget to do the scaling. So you go live with a platform that's not scaled and stuff. You start missing out things. Inconsistent settings management. A lot of applications have configuration settings and things like that, which you forget if it's not documented. And sometimes you look at documentation that's written by somebody else, you're like, what does that mean? It doesn't even make sense. Where should I add this setting? And if there's no proper documentation on it. Reproduce environments, just like how we were talking about experimentation. So I've got production, which has gone live 6 months ago. Now I want a copy of it before I release something in production. I should be able to reproduce the production platform fairly quickly as a test platform, so I can test my code and then, with full confidence, release it into production. Right? Hard to track configuration. Again, changes that people do inside the application are much more harder because you've done it inside the virtual machine or you've done it inside the application. So what's Azure's answer to it? Oh, sorry. One more last thing. what do you get with infrastructure as a code? So the first point is very apt to me. Even an idiot can deploy it. So you can give it to anyone, and pretty much with a little bit of upskilling, they can deploy it very safely because you know they can't cross the boundaries out of it and stuff like that. You can test in production-like environments. So if what is a classic difference between test and production? Test is always low profile compared to a production, so you don't actually get how the performance is going to be, or you can't do a performance testing unless you scale it up. So now what you can do is you can redeploy production into test, scale it up for 10 hours, pay only for that 10 hours, get actual feel for how production will react to whatever you're doing, and then shut it down and things like that. Practice deployments. This is key, right? So you don't have to hold your fingers like this when releasing to production because you practice it enough with tests. So what's Azure's answer to it? Get ready, boss.
Is Daniel?
Azure's answer to it is ARM templates, and Daniel is going to take us through, from the basics all the way up to how you get there and things like that. So very quickly, Azure ARM templates is Azure's answer to infrastructure as a code. It's so the new version, the version of Azure that we are all used to for the last couple of years is something that is known as Resource Manager. So basically, things are not deployed as a single. Back in the days when you had Service Manager, you deploy everything individually. You deploy a cloud service, you deploy storage, and then you kind of stitch them up. Azure Resource Manager is more you deploy things as one single entity. So you can put it in a bubble called as resource group, and then you can deploy stuff into it, and they all work together in there. Group resources together, you can deploy, update, or delete. What that means is you can do the first deployment, and then if you want to increase the profile of the app service, you can do an update without destroying all the other stuff. But you can also destroy the whole resource group. So if you're talking about true cattle and pet analogy, let's say you have an app service, right? You destroy your apps because you want to rebuild them. But the storage account that has all the images for your website, you don't want to be destroying them, right? Because they're static images, right? So you put the storage account that has the images in a resource group that you never destroy. So those are the ones you update. And the resource group that you have your Azure App Service or your CDN or load balance and stuff, you don't mind redeploying them many times because that's not static content, that's cattle. You can destroy it and recreate it. Whereas the shared resource group or the things that you don't want to destroy, that's your pets. You don't want to destroy them. So, and that's pretty much it. So Dan's going to cover these key benefits, and over to Dan for demo.
Cool. Now we're going to switch.
I got this.
It's good having our own AV technician, Daryl, on the
job.
master. I'm sure we're all a bit familiar with the Azure portal. So yeah, I love that's this whole infrastructure of code. One of the things that we at where I work, where we find this so important is being a big finance company. We need the ability to audit everything that was deployed. And when the auditors come along, you can say, this is what I had deployed at this moment in time, and here's the evidence. It gives us all that sort of function. So in the Azure portal, we use ARM templates to deploy this infrastructure. Everything's represented by these ARM templates. But if you were to say to me, hey, Dan, go write an ARM template for me that deploys a virtual machine, I'm going to look at you and go, I don't know how to do that.
From scratch, right?
From scratch,
yeah.
Because it's the blank page problem. We all kind of know what we want our infrastructure to look like, but how do you start doing that? So the easiest way is to go and do it that manual way. With Aben's beautifully named infrastructure, I love that. That was awesome. Build it out. You build it out in the portal, and then you get Azure to do the hard work. So in my case, I'm not going to go through the process of building a VM because I'm sure anyone who's been in Azure has probably done that once or twice. But here's Azure. Here's Aben's lovely infrastructure that he's built out. A nice virtual machine. It's not as nicely labeled, you can see, but it has got a environment in there. The easiest way I'm going to extract that is get Azure to do it for me. was this lovely automation script. So if I go into the portal, click on the resource group, we'll start from the beginning. Click on the resource group, click on the automation script. Azure's going to quite happily give me a ARM template that represents that infrastructure. It's going to give me this helpful warning saying there's a couple of things in your infrastructure that I don't know how to export, so I'm going to have to build that ARM template manually. But I can now go and click in this download button, get a zip file, it'll give me the ARM template definition of my infrastructure, some helpful source code that allow me to use it to actually deploy that, PowerShell, .NET, Ruby, and I can then use that, give that to Abe and say, hey, I want you to go deploy that in your Azure subscription. You take that and go deploy it, and he'll get the same infrastructure I had. But better yet, you can use that in a CI/CD pipeline. And I think that's what Aben's going to do next. So I'm going to first just open this zip file up and show you what the template looks like. Anyone here not seen an ARM template, an Azure Resource Manager template? Everyone's, some of you seen it. So it's basically a big text file. I'll go with it. Copy that out. It's literally a big JSON file. So yeah, you don't want to really be writing that from scratch. It is pretty nasty. The one you get out, it's got a lot of information in there that you don't technically need. So what I would normally do, rather than going straight and using this, I would go to the Azure Quick Starts over on GitHub, which I believe I've got a link to it. So if you head over to GitHub and go to the Azure Quick Starts templates, it will give you basically Azure Resource Manager templates to deploy any number of different infrastructures. And you can then basically take that and say, okay, that's kind of what I want. I'm just going to do a little bit of a manipulation. So you don't have to start with that blank page problem. You don't have to start from scratch. So, you've got, this thing's a growing list of example Azure infrastructures, and you can actually just click straight in there and say, actually, I want to create one of these, deploy to Azure, and it will go and deploy that infrastructure for me. It'll ask me a couple of questions. But the best benefit to this is you can simply just look at the ARM template, copy it out, and then begin to use that in your CI/CD pipelines. So I'll give you back to Aben now, because I think he's going to continue on with his talk, and then we'll do a bit of a demo of actually using an ARM template in a pipeline for real. So,
Oh,
That's right.
picture of your family too.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Cool. So what Dan has just now shown us is that we can start writing code, right? We can start writing code to deploy things on Azure and things like that. And again, this too has a critical problem. The file has to sit somewhere. It can't sit on somebody's laptop. Your production Azure platform scripts can't sit on a file server, because you're not supposed to have file servers. You're supposed to have SharePoint instead, which Alan will touch on in the next demo presentation. But basically, you get the point, right? It's a file. It's not useful anymore. So where do you want to be? You want to be having some sort of mechanism of putting scripts that an ops guy like Dan wrote, and let's say I was a developer and I wrote the application side of it. So Dan deploys the blank virtual machine with the IaaS on it. Now I want to deploy an application or a website onto it. We're back to kind of back to the same problem. I've got a script, Dan's got a script, somebody runs one part of it, somebody has to call me now, okay, now you run your second part of your script and things like that. It's not quite fluid, it goes back to creating all the same problems that we were talking about, right? So if Dan edits his script, it sits on his side of things and stuff like that. So what is a mechanism where we can have both the developers' stuff, all the scripts and things like that, and the ops guys' things in one location, right? What if we could actually deploy, the platform has to get deployed first, you need to have your virtual machine stood up before you dump stuff on. But then it's kind of automated, once that passes a green light, the platform is built well, it passes all the tests, the next part of it kicks off automatically and things like that. So this is where the concept of DevOps comes into play. It's kind of like a union of, and this is very well explained in the next slide. So Donovan Brown, if you guys haven't heard of him, please go check YouTube. He's kind of, is he the head of DevOps? He's one of the DevOps advocate and one of the leaders.
He used to be on the VSTS Azure DevOps product team. He's now one of the DevOps leading advocates.
Advocates, right? Yeah. So he kind of coined up this terminology a couple of years ago. It's come up in a few Ignite sessions of his. And he kind of starts with this, and then he goes on to the whole rub a bit of DevOps onto it. Sort of that's his tagline. But he kind of coined it really well because for me, this is very apt, right? It's not a technology. DevOps is not a technology. DevOps is kind of a process, but to understand it in a very granular sense, it's a union of multiple people, ops, developers, project managers. It's not just ops and devs. You have project managers who are involved in it. You have testers who are involved. There are a lot of different people who are involved in it, right? And then you have processes as well, what is test finished? Has test passed all the green lights? Has the tester passed it on so that you can deploy it into production? There's a lot of processes of things to be followed, workflows to be done, approvals to be gained, and things like that. And it's also a union of products in the sense that the stuff that the developers would use as products, as end products, like they might use Visual Studio, they might use some sort of application-based nugget packages or things like that. Whereas there's a lot of stuff that the ops guys would use, ARM templates as opposed to, or PowerShell scripts. They might use a script to restore databases at one point of the deployment and things like that. It's different products, right? It's when you bring them all together and they work in unison together, that's when you kind of get the DevOps platform or a DevOps company. So when you guys, I don't know if you can achieve 100% DevOps, or I don't even know what that means. We are 100% DevOps company. What does it even mean? You're always striving to achieve some sort of refinement in reducing the friction of bringing all these things together. That's how I see DevOps. So what are the technologies that you need to support DevOps? You need some sort of mechanism to do continuous integration. So in very simple terms, what is continuous integration as? A mechanism of bringing multiple scripts, multiple things that need to be built into deployment together initially. So it depends on what you're doing. So for a customer that I was working with last week, the continuous integration part was where we destroyed resource groups and we recreated the resource group. Just recreated the resource group, an empty resource group. But when we went into the continuous deployment, that's when you start deploying things onto Azure, all right? So that's when you deploy your app services, when you deploy your storage account and things like that as part of the script. And that's when you also bring in your application code part of it. So once you've got the app service running, you deploy the application code. So you finish the continuous integration, you go into the continuous deployment. But you need to do the last bit as well. It's not good enough that you've deployed a platform. You want to know that it's working perfectly as per baselines that you have set up and things like that. So you got to monitor it. And part of the monitoring is also learning from it. So one of the tools that out of Azure that we work with is Application Insights. So Application Insights is It kind of gives you a lot of telemetry on how your application is running from a web app service. What it'll tell you is how many users are hitting your app services, what's the time of the day when you have a lot of performance and things like that. So you can learn a lot of stuff out of it and make changes to your script. So you can say that you can have a scheduled CI/CD pipeline that says, every day from 11 in the morning till about 3, our website is hammered with users. So what you could have is at around 10, the CI pipeline kicks off to scale up your web applications, or scale down, or at 3 in the evening, it starts scaling down as well. That's also a script, right? And that's all done automatically. So it does the deployment, brings in all the scripts together, does the deployment, brings it down, which is why all 3 are in fun. So I'm gonna cover the first line very quickly, and Dan's gonna come back for the last bit. So Azure board, how many of you guys work with some sort of Kanban, Agile sort of background, or in your offices and stuff like that? Okay. So in very simple terms, boards is kind of putting post-it notes to know where things are at. So you'll have things that you've started, things that is in progress, things that's been completed. What you would do traditionally, put post-it notes against columns, right? So boards gives you that sort of capable, but it's a lot more, and we'll dig into them into the next series and stuff like that. What I mean by that is if your app service is doing, if it's got some issue and application insight picks it up, you can actually have a board ticket raised in board saying that there's something wrong with the application. Somebody needs to look at it. So nobody needs to actually ring up service desk and say, hey, listen, I think the service is down, or that page isn't working. And then somebody raises a ticket with someone through some other stuff. This can be automatically done and assigned to people. Pipelines, we're going to look into it through Dan as well. So pipelines is a mechanism of using an agent that you kind of rent out from Azure to do your deployment. So that's you within Azure going and doing the deployment part of it. But then you rent out these hosted agents that you do it. So repos is, in simple terms, is your file server for code. So what you do is you first create what is known as a master branch. That's what you get when you upload your code in. Then you never work against your master code. All right. So whenever, let's say there are 3 people working against the same code, what we do is we create a branch from the master. Branch is a copy of the initial branch, right? And then we all working against our own branches so that we are not affecting somebody else's work as well. But whenever there's a dependency problem or there's an error, it's all shown out for it. And then we check in that code, which means like traditionally saving that code back into that repository. And that's all done through Azure repos. And you can manage, copying. Once you've finished your work and you're like happy with it, somebody manages the master. They make sure before they bring the copy of what you've done, it doesn't break anything else. So they're the ones who get a pull request and they check things and stuff. And I'll let Dan explain test and artifacts.
So when we're deploying stuff in the cloud or on-prem or wherever, we like to test things, right? We'll test things. We built that infrastructure. We like to make sure that IIS server that we built is working. We like to make sure that container's running. So test plans is basic. Typically, you used to hand that over to a manual test team, and they would then go and run a bunch of tests, and they'd run test scripts, and it would take them 3 weeks, and they'd come back and say this works, and all these things are broken. And they hand you a big piece of paper. Test plans is basically a place for you to store all that information and make it visible to the team. The team can then feed generate bugs out of them and put them on the boards and make sure they get all that work done. Azure Artifacts, though, that is one of the most, probably the most important pieces of the toolkit, but it's not spoken about. When we build something, we typically want to start with an immutable artifact. We build something, we want to produce an immutable artifact, and we want to deploy that. We want to be able to go back in 6 months' time and say, what did we have deployed 6 months ago? It has not changed. Again, bring that finance company thing back in. I need to be able to say to auditors, that is what I had deployed 6 months ago. It has not been touched. Azure Artifacts is basically a place to put all of the things that you build. Now, there could be ARM templates. They could be, compiled DLLs. It could be, websites, whatever. It's basically a place you say, I've built something for my pipeline. I need to make it permanent so that no matter what happens, it's there forever, and I can say it's not changed.
So how different is that from repo?
Well, a repo is not what we call immutable. I can go and rewrite history. If I make a commit to a repo, there is actually nothing stopping me from doing what's called a history rewrite. It's a horrible, dangerous practice. And if you say to an auditor, no, this is what I deployed this commit number, they're going, that's not proof of this. An artifact or an artifact repository, it also allows you to do things like, I'm going to share this artifact that I've produced with all of my enterprise or with external customers or whoever without giving them access to the repository. You don't have to use it. It's an optional extra in there. And the good thing about Azure DevOps as a product is you can kind of turn these things off and on. You go, I want to use repos and pipelines. The rest, I've got my own. I'm using Jira for boards, or I've got some CMDB system that I'm using for service management. You get to pick and choose. So I'll jump in a sec. There's actually a bunch of other little things that we need, like. There's a marketplace built into this thing. So usually if you go, I need, artifacts, but I also need NPM support or this other thing, you'll find there's a marketplace extension to take care of it for you.
I think that's yeah.
Is that? Oh, you got another one? Oh, you got another one? Oh, there you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just jump over to Azure. I'm going to produce an organization. Just a couple of things about Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps, as you said, used to be called, it's gone through a number of names. It was, let's go back. It started its life as an on-prem product called TFS, Team Foundation Server. I think then became, when it moved to the cloud, it was VSO, Visual Studio Online, then Visual Studio Team Services, and now Azure DevOps. But the big thing that when they moved to Azure DevOps was it became the ability to create public repos. It really became a first-class open source enabler. So I run a bunch of open source projects. I use this to build, deliver, and run those projects in the cloud, and it costs me $0. And I'm sure Microsoft is losing money because the number of builds I run through the system, the amount of resource, those free pipeline agents. Yeah, I really hammer them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an organization in Azure DevOps, which is where, if you want to get started in this stuff, you can just go sign it. You need a Microsoft Live account.
Swap over?
Yeah, swap over things. Thank you, Daryl. Create an organization, and something that Aben pointed out earlier, when you're creating your organization, don't call it Aben Test, because you probably find you go, now I've got production data. I'm using this for real. This is the real thing, and
you can't change the name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Done it before, though.
Yeah, and so let's head over to Azure DevOps. Now, of course, sorry about my croaky voice. That's why I was getting Aben to do all the talking. So I've already got an organization set up. If you don't have an organization set up, you can just head over to dev.azure.com, sign in with your live account, say create it, and it'll go and create a new organization. It'll give you a name. If you have one, you can actually go and just create a new. You can have as many organizations as you want. They're globally unique, so you're probably not going to get the word hello. Hello Azure. So I'm going to create that. And create a new organization. It's going to ask you a name. The name's got to be unique. Now, Azure DevOps Services is a cloud-based system. I think there's about 6 or 7 regions. You're probably, like me, going to install into Australia East. But I think it's highly, you correct me if I'm wrong, it is highly available. It's in Southeast and Southeast, so it is a replicated service. Zone redundant. I'm not going to go and create one because I've already got an organization. What I would then typically do is go and create a project. And project is like a space where you're going to stick all your stuff. You get as many projects as you like. I don't know if there's an upper limit. Usually people tend to create projects around You know, hey, this is my fancy new app that I'm building, or you know, this is my my SharePoint VMs I'm going to deploy to the cloud for some reason. You create around that. So I'm going to go and create I've actually got a couple of projects called Hello DevOps, Azure DevOps, and Hello Azure DevOps 2. I'm going to go ahead and create a really imaginatively titled one called Hello Azure DevOps 3.
I don't think those are unique.
No, these are going to be unique only within your project, your organization. Now, remember I said public and private. If you create a private one, remember Aben was mentioned, you know, you get this pool of agents that do your work. When you run a pipeline, there's basically a VM sitting in the cloud that goes and executes your work. It might run your ARM template, or it might, you know, download a package from Azure Artifacts and put that on an IIS server or whatever. It's going to do the work for you. If you use a private repo, you get free pipeline. You get this hosted agent for free, but I think you get it's like 240 minutes per day. It's a decent amount. Most, you know, getting started, you're not going to run into a problem. But if you go and do a public repo, an open source thing, so if you've got no sensitive data, you have 10 pipelines, unlimited minutes. As I said, I've used up most of the Australia data center doing builds. So I'm going to create a public one. You've all heard of the word Git before? Git was a distributed version control system created by someone called Linus Torvalds. I think everyone's probably, Microsoft user group, you're all familiar with that. He created this. There's another version control system there called TFVC, Team Foundation Version Control. If you do a public repo, you can't use TFVC, but I think you can't go wrong with Git, so I'm going to just continue to do that. So I'm going to create my project. It'll take a few seconds. And once I've done that, what I can do is I can say, you know what, for this project, I just want repos and I want pipelines. I don't want any boards, or I want test plans only. I can turn on and off those settings. It doesn't mean I can't come back and turn them back on later. It just means that, you know, if I don't want if as an IT pro, an operational guy, I don't want test plans, and I don't want to have to worry about it. I don't want it taking up space on my screen. So I can go back over to that, over to this project settings down here. And I can go down here and say, I don't want boards, don't want artifacts, and I end up with a nice little, I've gone way too far back, we'll go back to this point. I end up with a nice clean sidebar here. I always get this overview. One thing I should point out, there's dashboards and boards. Dashboards are different to boards. Dashboards is really just a visualization platform for stuff you're doing in Azure DevOps. So it can do, you know, nice things like, the last time you deployed that Azure infrastructure, you had, you know, 25 test failures. I'd hope you didn't have that, but yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the repo. What I'm going to do for this demo is I'm going to get an ARM template that I previously created that deploys an Azure VM. And I'm going to put that in my repo, I'm going to make a build pipeline, and I'm going to deploy it. I get Azure deployed on my behalf. So that means Aben doesn't have to worry about any of the details. I can make him I can be idiot-proof. He can actually sit on his phone, and there's some apps here, he can go deploy. I delete all infrastructure, Aben comes along and goes, idiot, clicks deploy, and we're back to go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a repo. When you create a project, they always give you an empty repo, and it's usually a good idea to initialize that repo. And usually what you'll do is initialize it with a README, which is just a file to say what's in the repo. So I'm going to click the initialize button. And it will go and create a nice README with a, hey, you should. So this is the repo. As Aben said, it is really a collection of files and folders. but they are version controlled, and there's all this other stuff around them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of files to this. I would normally use a Git tool or Visual Studio Code to do this, but in the end, just to get everyone going, I'm gonna do something I would never do. I'm just going to upload files. There's nothing wrong with doing this. It's just not my usual workflow. Now, here's my ARM template and my ARM template parameters. I'm going to upload both of these, and I'm going to say added a new VM to my infrastructure. I don't know where Now, one of the other things is DevOps would be, DevOps way of working would be you might have you're building a website, you're going to sell jandals. I don't know what you can sell, but you're going to sell jandals. Your infrastructure, your IT pros are writing the they're writing the ARM templates. So you've got your developers committing code to the same repo. You're all working in the same space. You're all working on the same code base. So there's no just because I've got an ARM template in here doesn't mean that's the only thing I should have. So I've got that ARM template in there. We could go look at it, but we went, it's just an ARM template. That's not the purpose of this. What we're now going to do is we're going to create a pipeline. So I'll head over here to pipelines. Now, as Aidan said, there's a concept of build and release pipelines. They kind of do similar things, but they are, one you can consider part of the CI or the continuous integration, one of them is a continuous delivery. So we're going to focus on the build pipeline, but typically you'd want both, because a build generally produces an artifact, and then the release pipeline takes those artifacts and deploys them through, say, test and prod and so on. But you can get away with just doing a build pipeline, so I'm going to do that.
Dan, I don't know if this is going back a bit in the flow of things, but there's an online question about the preview feature.
Which preview feature? There are so many.
On the Azure portal.
Preview feature toggle. Is that about like going back and turning on additional features?
Yes. So, the cool thing about Azure DevOps as a platform is they give you access to all sorts of cool little stuff coming up, preview features, and if you want to enable them, you can opt in. I generally do. So you probably see. So if I head over to here and click on the preview features, I can go and enable. I can enable Git commit menu extension points, experimental themes, which allows me to get the experimental dark theme, which we all know everyone loves nice black.
Better for the eyes.
Better for the eyes. I can go and turn those stuff on. I can even turn it on for my whole org, so I can say, everyone, you're all using the dark theme. Actually, I don't know if you can force everyone into the dark theme, but it's a dream of mine. So yeah, preview features. Great stuff. I love being able to get early access to some of this stuff, especially. So as soon as I tick that, now it's now going to apply those preview features. So okay, let's go create a pipeline. And you can think of a pipeline as just a set of tasks that run, and there is a lot of different tasks that can run that execute on a given trigger. So it could execute when Abin commits code, or it could execute at 12 o'clock every night. So you might want to build your shop VM, rebuild it every night. You might want to, and we've got teams who actually use this to automate common tasks, not just building infrastructure, but they will go, I need to clear the cache of one of my servers every night, so I'm going to write a script, stick it in there. Azure Automation's kind of a better idea for that, but we'll give that one. Now, when I build a pipeline, I usually like to I recommend when you're an expert, you go to something called Pipeline as Code and use YAML, but the Visual Designer is an amazing way of getting started, and I think, it's like using the Azure portal to build infrastructure. You use it, you get good at using that, you understand it, and then you move over to this YAML file, where you put your definition of your build inside your repository. So I can actually, the good thing is, as I said, Azure DevOps, you're not forced into use one particular repo. You could say, hey, I want to use GitHub for my source control, but Azure Pipelines for doing the build and deployment. And I actually do that on a number of my projects. I have my source code hosted in GitHub, and my repo and my build pipelines all done by Azure. So I pick the repo I'm going to use, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I just want an empty job. I could pick one of these helpers, I could deploy an Azure web app, but I'm just going to build a VM. So I want to just create an empty job. I'm going to show you how truly easy this is just to do. So this screen basically, this is my job. This is my build that runs every time I change that will run every time I change code. What I'm going to do is, I said, Aben mentioned, you've got these agents, that VMs that run, that execute that job for you. You can have multiple agents. You might have one job run on a Linux agent, another one run on a Mac agent, another run on a Windows agent. But we won't go into detail on that one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a task. The only task I want to do is search for the task. I want to deploy an Azure resource group. Now I've added that. I could have a bunch of tasks. I could deploy 10 Azure resource groups. I could have 10, files and deploy an entire environment. But I'm just going to do one. So I'll click on that. It's going to ask me a bunch of questions. First thing it says is which subscription do you want to use? So I'm going to choose. Azure helpfully knows that Azure DevOps knows that I've logged in before, and I get to choose the Visual Studio Enterprise one. First time I select it, it's going to ask me to authorize. So it's basically saying, hey, Azure DevOps wants to be able to deploy to your subscription. I need you to authorize this. You only need to do this once. Once you've authorized your Azure DevOps project, it's done at the project level to deploy, it will. Now it's going to make me sign
Basically,
in.
it creates a service account inside Azure Active Directory so that the DevOps can go and talk to your subscription. So if you go and look into your registered applications, you will start seeing that organization name at DevOps something. So it's like impersonating that user, impersonating Dan to go and talk to Azure and do the work on his behalf.
And it's a great security feature, right? I can allow my pipeline to do very specific deployment tasks without having to give, Aben, contributor rights to my Azure subscription. I don't trust it. Aben's going to deploy a Bitcoin mining rig and use all my credit. So what I'm next going to do is it's going to ask me, okay, now I've authorized, I've scoped to my subscription. What I will now do is select the resource group that I want to deploy to. I'm actually going to call this something really imaginative. Yep. And of course, it's going to want me to select a nice region, so I'll go for the old East US. Now, it's saying, hey, I need a template to deploy. So it automatically knows you picked a repository. I'll go look in your repository and tell you what templates are available. So I'm just going to go pick that template. Clickety-click. And if you've worked with ARM templates before, you'll know that you can parameterize them, which means I could have a single template that deploys my test and my prod infrastructure, and I'll pass in a parameter to that template saying this is test or this is prod. And I might even say, hey, for test, I'll deploy a smaller VM, I'll deploy an S2 or versus an S4 for my prod, and you can do some cool stuff like that. So I'm going to select the templates file. I actually got this template out of the quick start, so I did a little bit of modification to clean it up. I wasn't 100% happy with that either. And what I can do is I can say, well, okay, I've got this one template that deploys this Azure infrastructure, but you know what? I want to override some stuff. I want to change those parameters. So I have set some previously, and I've got this. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want my VM name to be shopweb03. I want the environment to be test, and I want the username for that VM to be this. But you'll notice, what do I want my password to be? Now, is anyone who works in security here? Well, that's good to know. Anyone here ever dealt with security? Yes, we all have. Security, you say, hey, I'm going to put the password to my VM in the repo. And yeah, that's pretty much the last thing you'll ever say. So we need a way of managing that. Now, there's actually, Azure DevOps actually provides a really even cooler way that I'm not going to show you. We'll leave that for a session 2 and session 3. what we typically have to do is store that as a protected variable in our build. So I'm going to click over to variables, and I'm going to add a variable. And you might imagine the variable is going to be Azure admin, password. If I spell it right. I'm going to lock it so you can't see that I'm typing password 1. And done. So now my template is going to pick up that admin password, and it's protected. I can't go and I can't give Aben access to my build pipeline and have him get it out, because you can't unprotect that. So that's pretty much it. I won't talk about incremental versus full deployment modes. That's our pipeline. But we've got one last thing to do. We want to trigger it so that every time Aben or I make a commit to that repository, it deploys my infrastructure. Right? I don't want to have to, make a change and then tell someone to deploy it. What a waste of my, that's one extra click. I don't want to waste my time with that. So I'm going to enable continuous integration. And what that allows me to do as well, it says which branch do you want to do. I can say it off every branch, but typically I don't want to have a working branch, Dan's special branch. I'm doing some experimentation. I'm building a DV16 VM that's going to cost $6,000 an hour. I don't want to accidentally deploy that until I'm ready. So you can specify which branches to monitor to do your CI on. So I'm just going to click at Save and Queue. Now what that's going to do is it's going to save my changes and to this build pipeline, and actually it's going to queue this and start the deployment. So we can go and watch this handy little
Any reason why it starts with 71 and stuff?
I've been doing, because the build number is unique to the whole organization. So these numbers are all unique. So if I've deployed, trust me, I've practiced this a number of times. I've deployed a lot of times. So
That's sequential to the organisation, not to the project.
yeah. So yeah, as you can see, basically what Alan is implying is I screwed up 70 times, which is not far off the truth.
70 times.
So as you can see, this is Azure DevOps is now doing that deployment on my behalf. And if I head over to my old Azure environment, you can see the resource group has been created, and you can see that the resources are now beginning to be run. Now, if Aben comes along and deletes all my resource, I just click queue the build again, and it's back. Okay, sure, I've got if I've put a bunch of stuff on that VM, it's not quite back, but there's where DSC comes in. But we'll that's the topic for next year. So that's going to continue to deploy. And while we can sit here and watch this, what do we typically do? And if you ask me to put my DevOps hat properly on, what I would do is I would now build tests in that. I would write some tests to say, okay, so you've built a VM. Is it listening on port 80? You've said it's a web server. Is it actually responding? I'd write some tests. And the build pipeline can then validate that, yes, you've made the change, but that web server still works. Because it's all great that Aben can go and commit some code and turn off IIS on that web server. It's no good if I don't know that it's broken. So what I'm going to quickly do, hey Alan, how long do you need?
You're right.
You're right. Okay. I'm just going to jump into quickly show you what a release pipeline. I'm not going to build it from scratch. I'm going to show you one I prepared earlier, which is here. So as I said, what I would typically do is, how many of you guys deploy straight to prod? You go, developers made a change, and they give it to you, and you go, yeah, I'll stick that in prod.
I'm guilty of that in my past life.
Yeah, I think we were guilty of it in past life, but if our managers are here, we're not guilty of it now. We don't want to do that, right? We typically have environments we go through. So I want to deploy test environment, wait for my test to pass. I then usually have what's called a gate, or an approver, who says, yes, the business is ready for this change to go into production. Now, I'd like to think we could just go straight on through if all the tests pass, but most businesses are not ready for that. One day.
Netflix and stuff,
They do.
They do.
If the test pass, straight to production. But Azure DevOps has this concept of a release pipeline, which is it's really similar, but you have environments. So I've created a release pipeline. And this is I've taken the same process, the same artifacts that I was before, but instead of the build deploying that artifact, it produces the artifact and stores it. So if, for whatever reason, Azure DevOps went away, I've got an artifact that I could go and stick on a thumb drive and redeploy my infrastructure, even if Azure DevOps wasn't there. So, and I'm in the wrong project, it must be the other one. I'll go back to this one. So, let's take a quick look at what that looks like. I'm not going to, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too detailed. Maybe we'll do that next year. Feels like a long time away. So, right. So here I have obviously done a lot of builds. This is my build pipeline. This is what it looks like when you've been using a build pipeline a lot of times, for a long time. Every time I build, every time I make a change, a new build entry comes in, and I can go and look at what happened. In this case, this build is just taking the ARM template, running it against something called AZSK, which actually validates my ARM template against best practices. Again, something we could do an entire session on. And then stores that artifact in the in the build permanently for me. And then that then triggers a release pipeline. So the release pipeline visualization is pretty cool. So when you define a release pipeline, it's very, very similar to a build pipeline, except you have environments. And you can have a spaghetti of environments. You could have test, and you could have UAT and performance test and penetration test environments, all basically saying, and Azure will quite happily deploy them, put gates in and make sure the right people are notified, and you can even link it up to ServiceNow and say, just when I deploy to prod, I want Azure DevOps to tell ServiceNow that I have done that deployment. So I don't have to worry about filling in CMDB and all the other horrible stuff. And that is actually something we're doing right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick a release pipeline. Normally you would let the build pipeline run and the release pipeline just execute off that. But well, why not? Let's go kick a build pipeline and let the release run. So I'm going to take this release pipeline and I'm just going to go queue a build.
So each of those are, each time you made some changes to the code, right? And you kind of checked it in.
Correct, yeah. So I made a change to the code, or maybe I didn't. Maybe Abin deleted my test system and I wanted to redeploy it, so I just queued a manual build. And this is how easy and as I said, you can do it from your phone. So Abin's deleted my test environment, I queue the build. I keep using you as the breaker of all my environments. Again, the build runs. The build is just going to store those ARM templates for me, but it's going to use this great thing called the AZSK, the Azure Security Kit, which will look at my ARM templates and say, hey, you've got a storage account and you haven't encrypted it. That's not going to fly, and it will actually block my build. It'll fail my build because I've gone and trying to deploy something that security would just go, phew, not now. So this is going to take a few seconds. It runs through this thing. There's a whole bunch of other things that it can do, which if you put this in front of your security people, they get very excited. It helps them so much, and I can't express that enough. And it's built in. It's not like you actually have to go and buy it. It's there. So we'll leave that for a minute, because it does actually take a few minutes. It's actually got to go and get the Azure Resource Manager PowerShell modules and download those and stuff, so that does take a few seconds. And while we're doing that, what I'll do, I can actually go and kick a release. There's nothing stopping me. As I said, Microsoft provide me with all these free minutes, so I don't have to wait for that build. I'm going to go create a release anyway. Normally that would, as I said, that would happen off the pipeline. I can go and say, hey, you know what? I don't want to deploy to prod. I just want to deploy to PS, but I'm going to deploy to prod. I'm going to select the version. So how cool is this? Abin made a bad change. He turned off something that he shouldn't have. I need to roll that back. I'll choose the previous version and deploy it. Rollback is so much easier. So I'm going to deploy the latest version, and click create. Now this is going to start the release pipeline. So my release has now been queued, and I can go and watch it. You put this up on a visualization dashboard, and when the business says, "Hey, where's my release?" and you go, just watch the board, and it's shiny, flashing lights. You go, look how much work we're doing. Little dials are moving. So it's going to go and do that, and I can watch the logs. Nice and exciting. Of course, the logs are always boring. But what is going to now happen? It's going to deploy that to test. And if I had written tests, test automation, which infrastructure pros, you guys, we can all write test automation. If that passes, it's now going to send an email to Aben, who's he's my release manager. And he is going to approve, he might approve my release. I don't have to, I can go home now. I'm done, my job is done. It's now up to him. Oh, he's going to get his phone. So it's going to email him. He needs to push a button on his phone and it will approve and release that. So we'll just wait for that to finish. We can.
Aiden. So it's on your phone.
I just hope it comes.
Well, we also have to wait for the deployment to test finish, which of course is, I just realized because this is a new deployment, that VM is going to have to spin up first, which may take a few seconds. We'll assume that does go through. We can maybe do, Alan, maybe we jump into yours and wait for that approval at the end and we'll come back to it. It'll pop up a nice window as well, and I've been overriding the approvals, but in a real environment, I can switch that off and say, I was the one who made the change. No matter what I do, I cannot deploy this. No matter how, and auditors love this. The fact that if I made the change, I can't change it.
Just show yes, please.
Oh, Aben's showing the, we can't
It's
see.
not on screen, sorry, but yeah.
Showing the approval. He got about 50, 70. Yeah, far away.
See the approval.
Yeah, I've got a lot of repos involving a lot of artifacts. Do you want to deploy them as one, or do you deploy each artifact as it gets built one by one in the same amount?
It depends. If you're building a microservice architecture, what we tend to do is we build each, produce them as an artifact, and then once the completed, say you've got a DLL, an application that's got 10 dependent DLLs that do a bunch of helper support functions, you'll generally just build those and store them as artifacts, and then when your master build pipeline runs, it picks all those up and pulls them. But if you've got a sort of a key support library that you want to test in a real environment every time, there's no reason why you can't. You can have, in a release pipeline, you can actually add multiple artifacts to trigger your release pipeline. So you can say, I have this pipeline, anytime one of these builds runs and produces an artifact, I want to run and test that infrastructure. You might not say that's going to go to production. So I've only got one artifact in this particular pipeline, but you can have multiple. So they're all feeding in from different build pipelines, all triggering them. And you can even do things like filter the build artifacts. So you can say only master branch builds that produce this artifact can execute the release, but I also want to run the release off dev artifacts produced by this build pipeline. And we actually do that. So you can filter that. So maybe we hand over to Alan, because this deployment is running. I can actually show you over here. It is running. It's, what is it, Azure. Hello Azure DevOps test RGP. So that's quite happily building that infrastructure, but it is a VM, so it's going to build a while, and we can maybe come back to the end. Sound good? Is it good with you, Alan?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. You're taking my words.
Try and drive your beast of a machine.
Oh, you didn't.
So I thought I'd just wrap up with some cool numbers. So who uses Microsoft Teams? Well, sort of half. Where are the rest of you? There's lots of people using Teams. So if you're one of the 87 Fortune 100 companies, you're probably using it. It's also now in 44 different languages. So, and it also does like translations as well. If you've got talking to people in other languages, a guy down in Wellington likes to actually run it in French, and then he writes some stuff in French and we translate it just to sort of see it all working. And there's lots of active users across a whole bunch of companies. And pretty much every customer we talk to now, sort of Teams is, if they're on-prem with SharePoint or some other environments, they're usually going to go to Microsoft Teams as a migration. So becoming more and more common. And as we move forwards and it starts taking over from Skype for Business as well, become like pretty much everyone using Office 365 will be using Teams. So I thought I'd share those numbers with you. And the little clicker's not working. Now it is. The next thing was this putting in the ability to create an intranet inside of SharePoint. And from the Ignite that was in 2017, which was about September-ish, all the way through to the next one, there was a bunch of stuff that was done. Like literally they brought out communication sites, there were kind of a few missing features here and there that people needed, and gradually over the year they've been adding capability, which now means that all of those on-prem intranets and classic sites that we were looking at previously, struggling to migrate them, now becomes a bit more of a reality given all of the work that Microsoft have done this year and all of the updates. When you kind of see it as a big pipeline of all of that sort of roadmap stuff that you look at and the individual little bits, there's a lot that goes on throughout an entire year. Also, demand has grown. So just in general, these are the numbers that from research they've found as the size of data growth and everything else. And of course this impacts on the Office 365 environment as well. So they've also increased their numbers. So we can now store 30 million items in a library. And it continuously scrolls and we don't run out of space when we hit 5,000, which is really nice. You can go up to 25 terabytes in one site collection. That is a lot of content. That's a huge amount. You'd have to have 30 million items probably to hit that number. They've increased the minimum file size to 15 gig. This one, I had to look this up. I thought he spelled it wrong, but it's actually an exabyte, which is 1,000 terabytes, which is a lot.
So
inside of
you
one
don't
tab.
have the 5,000 items list view problem.
No, you don't. You just
It's
create
solved.
indexes. It's solved. Yeah. And it just keeps scrolling, providing you've added indexes. Here's a big number. That's a lot. A lot of organizations sort of a while ago were sort of saying, oh, it can only index 50 million items on-prem. And they're like, well, that'd be all right. We haven't got that many in our file system. But now people will have a lot more than that. A lot more. But that is definitely going to cater for that. And you get 20 times more storage. The other thing I thought was interesting, number-wise, was just from a security perspective, what's going on in the background. Both with sort of Azure authentication, there's like 450 billion monthly authentications. It's probably even higher than that now. And also the fact that they're now including devices in that, scanning devices, keeping your Windows devices, managed devices up to date. Also, the number of emails that get scanned is quite incredible as well. So, just thought I'd summarise the whole year with the most important numbers to know. And hopefully now, your build is finished.
Yeah, well, Aben's just received the email.
Oh, has he? Oh,
Yeah, he's received. So he would then be able to log in on his phone.
You're in here.
Yep, and he would be able to log in on his phone, and he would see something along the lines of, we'll go back to this, it says something along the lines of saying pending approval. And it says pending approval on Aben26 Gmail. Now you'll know Aben's email, so go email him. Sign him up. For
And everyone in
Sign him up, yeah. Sorry, Aben. So he can now approve that, and as soon as he approves that, it will start doing a little doobly-doo.
You doobly doing?
He's checking the tests have run. He's validating that CMDB has been updated. He's authorizing with security and making sure they're happy. He's making sure the releases are within the release window, right?
I'm pressing approve, but it's...
Do you have to pinch zoom on that? Because it's kind of small when I saw it
Yeah.
before.
I think it's designed to run on the desktop.
So I could
Not
have,
when you're in a holiday batch.
what I can, he can also, one thing, he can actually say, hey, look, I'm going to, now, I could click override. He can actually say defer this approval. He can actually reject. He can put a comment, but he can also put a time in and say, look, I approve this, but I want the deployment to happen in midnight, when all our users are not there. So, still waiting on Aben to approve that.
Just think I'm with you, bro.
You have one job, Owen.
I'm clicking.
He's only got 30 days to do it as well. It's going to time out.
This cartoon said 24 hours.
Oh, yeah.
And there's other thing. If I'd linked boards to this, it would actually list all the issues that I had assigned to that release. So it would say, hey, we want to release this change. I want to turn off I'm turning on HTTPS. We're enabling TLS 1.3, and then he can go, well, actually, I'm good with that, or I'm not good. So it becomes a really powerful tool, and this is what we use to do our production deployments, and it is pretty powerful when you give the security team to say, you just go and have a look, you click approve if you're okay, and they just go in and do it. Unless they're Aben.
I think you're just going to have to...
I'm just going to look, on behalf of Aben,
Have you done it?
I'll email you back.
I think probably, maybe you weren't signed in, but yeah.
It just keeps kicking me out. I think it's my problem.
Okay. You can also reassign it. If I'm away, I can say, look, reassign it. He can reassign it to someone. So that's going and approving, and boom, my deployment is now in process. So I'm now deploying prod. And this is ARM templates is something we sort of briefly touched on as our idempotent. So if the infrastructure is already deployed, it's already in state, it's not going to change anything. If I've enabled a port 443 on a network security group, it's just going to add that. It's not going to go and switch off my VM and do some other stuff. It's not going to redeploy some stuff. So this is just a tiny part of what it can do. We've got some really, really powerful. Some of our release pipelines include multiple environments. We scale up our performance test environment. We scale out our app gateways so that we can run performance testing, and we then scale them back once they're done. So
you can do that scheduling stuff, right? So when you know when your websites are going to be hammered and stuff like that, you can have it scheduled so that you don't even have to do this bit of approval. It just clocks in at that 12 o'clock mark. It starts scaling things up automatically, and then scales it down as well.
Yeah.
You want to be continuously paying money.
So it's such a powerful enabler of all of these things that developers have had, and IT pros now get all these the benefits that be cool. Well, no, developers are not cool, please. Don't be like developers. But we get to use all this stuff, and it is once you get started on it, you kind of go, how did I ever do all this stuff before? And it is once you've got that base ARM template and you start building upon it, you realize you're just making small iterative changes. So you add that new feature to your VM or to your network or to your you add that SQL Server into that VNet, and you trigger that deployment, and then your tests run, and you go, they all pass, and you think, wow, I now can go home to sleep rather than going, I deployed that SQL Server. I hope that, I'm not going to go get a call from the development team saying, you said it worked and it didn't. So you get to build all the stuff. And when you have a look at the tasks available to you, there's some really cool preview ones that I managed to get my hands on that are coming out. Things like cred scanners, which will look in your repository and go, hey, you put a password, you put a SQL connection string in your repo. I'm not even going to let you commit that. It protects you from yourself, because no one wants a call from the security guys saying you put a production database password into your repo. Now everyone's got it. Now you have to roll the keys on everything, and welcome to staying up all night. So amazing stuff. It's the fact that it's a managed service for me, and that I run a lot of open source projects on it, and I don't pay for any minutes. I just build and build and build, and I make a change, kick a build, and I go, oh, I screwed that up. 5 seconds later, I make another change, another build's queued, and Microsoft's taking the minutes. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Aben, have you got any more?
No, that's pretty much it. So we'll get deeper into it next year, get more stuff into it. So if you guys have any questions, put it up in the meetup, and then we'll cover it up next year. Next year is not too far away. It's so cool to say next year.
One thing I sort of forgot to mention is we say Azure DevOps, right? And everyone goes, it's for Azure only. No, you can pretty much deploy anywhere. You can use this with anything. You can deploy on-prem. There's these things called deployment agents. So you run a deployment agent on your on-premise infrastructure, and it connects up to Azure DevOps, and you can then execute deployments.
Yeah.
You can do it to other cloud providers. You can if you can do it, you can do it anywhere. You can do it for Mac. It's got Mac and Linux build agents. PowerShell core is cross-platform, so I build and deploy and test all of my PowerShell stuff on all platforms because I can.
Just one more thing, this audience is not it's not just for technical people, the Azure DevOps, right? You can bring in your project managers, you can bring in your sponsors and things like that, so they know what's happening with the project, where it is and things like that. You don't have to email them that this many builds have been done, we are at this part of the release mechanism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's where you go into. So it's not just for technical folks as well. It's where you build and manage your whole project, your whole application. So
and you can link it into Microsoft Teams. You have a team channel, and when the release is done, or when the approval's waiting, instead of going to Aben, because he's clearly unreliable for that,
well,
it
if
goes
I come to Teams, I would have uploaded it straight away. It came to my personal details, so that's why it didn't work. But yeah, you can get a message pop up in Teams saying that, hey, the build is done, can somebody approve it, and things like that. And not somebody, whoever should approve it, should approve it.
Yeah, they're still going to have all, you can lock that down to deployment groups and stuff like that, and it's all linked into AD if you're using AAD.
It's all security trimmed, as in you can have role-based access, so you can put people into groups. So if you can put groups into project managers, and only they can see what they're meant to see and things like that. So it's all pre-baked and stuff like that. Very powerful. So,
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah,
That's pretty much it. That's it.
cool. On time.
Nick, was you going to wrap us up?
Good work, boys.
And Alan?
So yeah, this is our last event for the year, as the invite said. So I really appreciate everyone coming along. It's been a long year, but a fun year, I think. I think we've managed to do every month except one. It was like September or October or something that we missed. Yeah. I had a lot of fun. It's been good working with you guys and you guys as well, Aben and Dan. So yeah, we're wrapping up, but there's going to be a bit of change next year. I'll give you a bit of a preview. So Alan and Daryl are going to be creating a spin-off group, shall we call it that?
A branch.
A branch. They're branching, they're forking. Creating a separate user group focusing more on the 365/user adoption sort of stuff. Is that about right?
Modern workplace.
Modern workplace. So instead of this big amalgamated group, which is where we came from, because if you don't know the history of this group, we were like 3 or 4 different user groups that kind of all amalgamated. So yeah, as things have progressed, it kind of just makes more sense that we have kind of different audiences. There's a bit of crossover, so we can still present at each other's user groups. That'll definitely be happening. But I think it makes sense as well that kind of have a 365 modern workplace focus, and then have the kind of Azure infrastructure-y focus one, which is what this will morph into.
Oh yeah, he was.
What's that?
Nick's going to mention.
Yeah. Also, this user group stemmed from the community. So it's a community-based user group feeding back to the community. And if you don't know, I'm actually going to be joining Microsoft in a couple of weeks' time. Which is something I'm very happy about, very excited about. But obviously I'm keen to keep this group being run by the community rather than being another Microsoft group. So going to be handing over to these gentlemen in front. So Aben and Dan will be taking the reins of this user group. I'll obviously still be around, so I'll be attending as much as I can and helping out and sorting out some admin on the back end. And presenting every now and then if I get invited.
Bar will be pretty high on
Yeah, but the actual
You'll be opening the door and running the lift.
pretty much. But the actual organisation of it, I'll be handing over. So yeah, a lot of change. We're just discussing more of that after this session. Yeah.
Do Avon and Dan need help running this?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to come up.
Yep.
And we're looking for cool leaders as well.
Or not cool leaders, they don't
They don't have to be cool.
And also presenters as well.
Mm.
We do, you don't want to be seeing our faces, especially, just us presenting all the time. So we really want others to come in and, do not feel any fear. You just got to take that first step and just take a hack at it and just do it a shot. And we're here to help you guys out. So we need more leaders, co-leaders of the actual meetup and things like that. But I'm looking for more presenters as well.
And if you've just done something at work or in your own spare time, it could literally be a 5-minute presentation. It doesn't have to be a half-hour, 1 hour long thing. 5 minutes, hey, I've done this, I thought this was cool, this is what I've done with it. Leave it at that.
So we'll keep some of the other sessions more shorter. Like today we ran a 1 hour one, but we'll try and keep it much shorter so that we can cover more and more topics. And so please feel free to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys want to pitch some ideas and stuff like that, just post it on Meetup and
Totally.
let's all talk.
But yeah, so I think we'll take a break until February. So won't run anything in December, Jan. I think I'm probably going to be away in February in Seattle. But yeah, these guys will be here. There'll be someone around helping them run it. And then, we'll take it from there. Look forward to seeing you all next year. And if you have a 365 Modern Workplace interest, we'll definitely be sending out the link to these guys' user group once it's out. So you can attend both if you're interested. Cool. Right, thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks.
See you next year.
Super. Yeah. Good job.
I didn't have tissue.
I actually did, but
Okay,
Yes, a buddy from my team hit up Abe and
I saw
helped,
that.
so
That'd be
he's
awesome.
He's pretty amazing. Like he's taking over my role at the work.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Infrastructure lead.
Yeah, nice.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah.
Appreciate
I didn't know
it.
that you're leaving for war.
Yes.